Hello, everybody. Welcome for joining today. We're going to give everybody 2 minutes to join, just in case some people are running a little late. So please just sit tight, and I'll start the webinar at 2 minutes past the hour. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who have just joined us, I'm going to give people 1 more minute for anyone who might be running late. So just bear with me, and we'll start in 1 minute. All right, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining today. Today's webinar, Roadmap to CMMC Readiness, or how Exostar can help you get ready for CMMC. Before I get started, let me cover some housekeeping details. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That includes a Q&A session. You will be muted during the discussion today, so I can present without interruption. As I mentioned, we do have a large Q&A session at the end. These questions were gathered when people registered, and so they were submitted prior to today's event. If for some reason there's an outage to your stream or we get cut off, please go ahead and just click on the email that you received with the link. That should refresh and get you back to the page. For your convenience, there is a link in the YouTube description to a glossary of commonly used terms, acronyms, and initializations that will be referenced during today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That can be found at www.exostar.com/resources anytime after the event. You can also use that YouTube link you received via email. That'll also take you to the replay. If you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts, if you want a copy of the slide deck I'm using today, you can reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or you can use the live chat feature on our website, www.exostar.com. If you click on any of the product pages on our website, that'll open a chat feature, and you'll be able to speak to one of our folks and get your request fulfilled there as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Kevin Hancock. I'm Director of Solutions at Exostar. I'm solo on today's webinar. That's a little change for us. I usually have a couple partners or other folks on the webinar, but today it's just me. We are talking about Exostar solutions that help you complete CMMC readiness, and so that's why it's just me today for you. So over the next 45 minutes or so, this is the agenda I'll be covering. I'm going to give just an update on the latest CMMC news. We're going to talk a little bit about trying to decide which level of CMMC you need to fulfill to, that level 1, level 2, or level 3. We're going to discuss how do I define the system that I actually need to be compliant. We're going to talk about how do you assess your current state and some tools for you to go do that. How you go about remediating your policies, that system that you're actually trying to target for that system security plan. How you can shortcut some of those requirements by choosing a cloud solution, and the responsibility that goes with that. So how does that shared responsibility model between you and the cloud provider break out? And what do you have to think about as you still need to, if you will, update your policies, create your system security plan, and include that cloud solution as part of that overall system? And then obviously, how do I engage for an assessment? How do I get those ongoing updates as things change over time? And how do I, fulfill my obligations on that ongoing basis? So the current state of CMMC. So currently, CMMC is in the rulemaking phase. It's currently in what's considered a quiet period. Why those final tweaks, additions, drafts, etc., are done by the bodies making the rules. During this period, there is no, that's why we're not hearing much about CMMC currently. The current timeline is that the interim rule will be published in March of 2023. So, right, obviously, almost the end of October now, going into November. So we've got November, December, January, February, March, the interim rule goes. That then kicks off a 60-day public comment period. And so the earliest you'll start to see the CMMC language be inserted into contracts will be that May 2023 date. That's why you kind of see these two different dates out there, the March and the May date. There have been some folks going through a voluntary assessment plan. So in August, a joint surveillance voluntary program was announced. This was a joint venture between the Cyber AB, that's the accreditation body for CMMC, and DIBCAC itself to have some organizations volunteer to go through the assessment. This allowed them to, if you will, test the assessment process, the assessment guides, etc., that were part of the overall program itself. When I last attended a session, there had been 3 that were in the final stages of being completed. The actual assessments were done. They were just waiting for the final paperwork to be signed off. So they are starting to get some feedback from organizations that have gone through, what is the current assessment program. Those will obviously be rolled into the overall interim rule and the final rulemaking once it comes down. That accreditation body that I'm talking about is the Cyber AB. You can find information at their website. That's what you see there, that https://cyberab.org. This used to be called CMMC AB. If you still have that site bookmarked, you'll be sent over to Cyber AB. One of the questions we did get in the lead up to this webinar was about training. And so I'm happy to announce that the Cyber AB has spun out a second organization called the CAICO. It's actually also on that cyberab.org website. And that is just that. This is going to be the training arm of CMMC. It's going to, it'll provide a full gamut of training material for really kind of the CMMC professionals out there. And they're classified at a number of different levels, right? There's a CMMC professional, there's a CMMC practitioner kind of accreditation, certification, etc., all the way up through the folks that'll actually be doing the assessment. those programs and exams are just being put into a system now. And so, over the next few months, those should get finalized. There have been some people taking beta tests, etc. So that's kind of the overall state of where we are today in this rulemaking process. So again, just to kind of highlight what I just mentioned, right? It's October 2022 today. We got 6 months till May of 2023. That's when, again, you'll start to see the DFARS clauses show up in contracts. So, this will be somewhat of a rolling implementation just because it will be based on the contracts you're currently fulfilling or the ones you want to bid upon or the ones that are, that are shown to you from the primes because they've signed a larger contract. So, kind of that rolling period will be based on when do you want to bid on a contract, what does the current contract require you to fulfill, and if you're comfortable doing that. And so as those contracts come into place, that's when you'll actually have to have, if you're going for a level 2 CMMC, where you'll have to have that triennial assessment first done. All right, so as promised, right, this is kind of the Exostar practical roadmap for that CMMC compliance. That first thing you want to do, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, is really you got to figure out where your destination is. Which of the CMMC levels does your organization need to achieve to fulfill either the contracts you want to bid upon, your overall business goals, etc.? And there are 3 levels, right? We're talking CMMC level 1, 2, and 3. And each of those 3 levels have different requirements, a different number of controls you need to be able to satisfy, but they all kind of build upon one another. So, the CMMC level 1 has 17 controls, and those are included in CMMC 2. So you have to have those basic ones in place to even really start upon that level 2 journey. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about how do I determine that level. And then we're going to spend a bit of time about talking about the system itself. So when you go to determine, what do I need to actually control, right? So what you need to control is access to the storage of and systems that process controlled unclassified information, right? At the heart of this, it's all about the type of information you handle. If you're level 1, you handle federal contract information, or FCI, right? That's the requirements on there. If you're level 2 or level 3, you're going to be in possession of controlled unclassified information. And so you need to take a look at all of the people, the processes you use, and the technology you use to store, to process, or to transmit that information. And those people, processes, technology, etc., the boundary of those and around those are what you need to build your system security plan on. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how you kind of identify that. Then once you have that system, right, we're going to talk about the initial assessment itself, right? Because NIST 800-171, which is the governing standard around controlled unclassified information, has been around for quite a number of years. Most of you who are fulfilling government contracts today should already have been working toward or fulfilling a number of these different controls, to work on these contracts today. So you may already be doing a number of these things. You may already have quite a bit of this already documented. You may very well have already generated different scores and entered information in different places that get you part of the way or even all the way to that compliance journey or on that compliance journey. So once we identify where that where that is, and you've performed that initial assessment, we're then going to talk about our programs of action and milestones. These are the gaps that we identify as we go through an assessment to determine what do we still need to do to fully comply, right? There are tools, and some of these are Exostar tools that can help you identify each of those different controls, what you've done to fulfill that, consolidate all that information in a single place, provide if you will, a nice, easy reference library. So when that auditor does come in, they have a chance to look at one place to do this. It'll also give you that opportunity to think about, okay, if I want to, kind of take care of a number of these controls, can I utilize a service? Can I sign up for a cloud service that satisfies a number of these controls? So I can focus on what I do and let the cloud service focus on, kind of storage and processing of this information. If I'm extending this out to partners, or if I want to engage a partner to help me in this process, how can I go about that? Then again, right, how do I actually maintain control and make all this information presentable, right? Because part of the level 2 assessment process is that you've got to be able to have a triannual assessment of your policies and procedures and how those fulfill those controls. So how do I put that in one place? How do I make it accessible so when that assessor does come, right, they have a nice, easy job to do. I can provide all the information I have for them, and so we can get through these assessments in as quick and easy a manner as possible. And we'll talk about a little bit how to engage with that third party to do that assessment as well. That'll be a real short topic because there's a list of those available, and I'll just kind of show you where to get it. So those are the steps we're going to cover as part of today's session. So what I said we talk about first is that how do I choose that destination? How do I decide what level I need to be to choose my level, right? So, and really, I think the best way to do this is to look at what you're doing today, what contracts you currently are fulfilling. Look at the language within those contracts. And now, this may be something you need to engage with your organization on, right? Talk to your legal counsel, talk to your actual procurement group, or with the larger prime contractor you're working with. Ask them, will I be getting controlled unclassified information as part of this contract? And the easiest way when you're looking at those contracts is to look at those clauses. So if you're an organization that as far as you know, doesn't look or doesn't get controlled unclassified information today, you very well may be just that level 1. And the contracts you may be fulfilling today don't have DFARS clauses, right? You've got a FARS clause, that's that Federal Acquisition Regulation, 52.204-12. These are 17 practices that you have to have in place. These are a subset of those 110 you need to have in place as part of level 2 or level 3. But again, these are common best practices to protect information, and the type of information you handle as part of this is that FCI, that federal contract information. And so again, if this is the kind of contract you have today, then you most likely going forward will just be a level 1. So again, I would ask you to check the contracts you have, check with your legal, or again, check with the prime contractors you're working with and ask them as part of the contract, what are you required to do? Now, if you think you do have controlled unclassified information today, if in your contracts you've got those DFARS clauses, right? 252.204.7012, right? And it's actually dash. Sorry, I don't know why I put a dot there. My typo. These are ones that mandate that you fulfill NIST 800-171 practices today to protect that controlled unclassified information. As part of what you're doing today, you probably have already completed some kind of assessment around how you're doing against 800-171. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a couple slides as well. So you may have already very well done an assessment. You may know exactly where you are today. You may have got some scores, etc. So again, if what you're doing today is around NIST 800-171, you fulfill those controls because you are getting that controlled unclassified information, then you're going to be level 2. And there is talk about bifurcation of level 2. You know, one set needing a triennial third-party assessment, others needing only an annual self-assessment. I actually think there'll be an annual self-assessment and that third-party assessment every 3 years will also be kind of part of it. I don't know if they're actually going to get the bifurcation. That'll obviously be one of those things that comes out when the final rules are published. So stand by to get a, you know, if you will, the clarification of that. And the last category, level 3, right? This is that expert level where you've got controlled unclassified information that is actually classified as critical controlled unclassified information. These will include additional controls above and beyond that 800-171, and instead you'll be governed under 800-172. These are additional controls that you need to have in place above and beyond just the kind of that mid-level of 800-171. Additionally, you're going to be a triennial government-led assessment. This isn't a third-party assessment. This will be an assessment done by DBCAC. They're going to come in, they're going to look at your policies, procedures, etc., and see how you're doing as you fulfill those requirements. All right, so we talked quite a bit there about controlled unclassified information. And so we often get the question of what is controlled unclassified information? And I wish I had a better definition for you. And I wish I could tell you that, look, it actually is always marked clearly. You'll get it from the contracts you fulfill, and it'll be marked clearly, and you'll have a good definition of what you need. So this is often abbreviated as CUI. Some people pronounce this as CUI. Some people hate that pronunciation, so they call it CUI. But at the end of the day, right, this is controlled unclassified information. I have some samples there in blue, right, of what this might entail. It's all of those things that are part of you fulfilling the contracts you have for a particular system that you're developing for the Department of Defense. And it's those things that aren't necessary, they're not classified as secret, top secret, etc. But it is those things that are critical to the system itself and can be used to, recreate, understand, or better kind of put together that system. So it's things like analysis, tech specs, source code, technical reports that you've written, standard specifications, bills of materials that outline the system, things like that. So all of those things fall under this controlled unclassified information. If you receive information from a prime and you're not sure and you think it falls under this, ask them, right? Ask them if this should be marked controlled unclassified information. Then you know that it is. You know that you've got to store it particularly well. And even more importantly, you know that any derivative works of that you create also need to be marked as that, stored and secured in that same manner. And these are the things that are governed by NIST 800-171. So one of the other questions we received today, and I've received on a number of these webinars, is what's the relationship between CMMC and NIST 800-171? And so NIST 800-171 are those controls that were determined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, right? That's what NIST stands for. And these are the controls that they put in place for that people that work with this kind of information need to have in place in their locations, across their organizations, with the people that involve it, etc. So these outline 110 different controls that you have to have in place across 14 families that tell you exactly what you need to do to protect that controlled unclassified information. It's not necessarily an exact specification of how to do it, but it tells you all the different controls you need to have in place in order to fulfill that requirement. How you actually implement that is kind of up to you, but you've got to have that policy written down. You've got to have the checks in place that the policy's actually been implemented. There are requirements to train your people on these controls and what's required of them as part of it. If you've got manual processes in place, if you've got manual storage, if this is a sneaker net kind of setup where you're carrying drawings from a secure file cabinet to a machine, you're inputting the machine, etc. Who has access to those files? Who can actually enter that information? What do you do to protect that information once it's in? Where do you lock that information back up when they're done, etc.? All those things are also then part of it. It's not necessarily, even though it is often considered just about technology, it can also be utilized in manual processes as well. So these are those different categories, right? These are those 14 categories which those 110 controls fall into. It is all those things around, as you see here, access control, that awareness and training I talked about, the physical protection, the overall security assessment of the system, etc. So these are the big groupings, if you will, of how these fall in place. So again, if you're currently on, or you're currently fulfilling a government contract, and you have DFARS clauses in those contracts, they most likely today call out that you need to be fulfilling these controls today. And so you may have already done an assessment of how you're doing against these. Today, it's usually been a self-assessment, right? It's been that self-assessment of how you're doing, and that's been okay. But that's going to change going forward. So as with anything, us saying we do it and then us being able to actually prove to others that we do it, that's where this kind of difference is going to come into play. So because these controls are over a particular system, one of the first things you need to do is identify that system. And that system is going to be those people, the processes, and the technology that are used to store, process, and transmit that controlled unclassified information. So, for example, we're bidding on an RFP that we received from a prime contractor. We've signed the contract, so we won the bid. We've signed the contract. The actual specifications, the things we have to do to fulfill that contract may be sent over to us from that prime contractor. And some of those items may actually be controlled unclassified information. So, depending on the kind of organization you have, that may come into your sales team. It may come into your services team. But, those kinds of documents are going to be received by an individual, or an individual is going to get a location to pick those documents up at. And that location may very well be a URL that they click on. It's password protected. They bring that down, right? Once they bring that down, it then enters your system. So what you then do with that kind of kicks off that process. Okay, we take this, we store this information somewhere. It's disseminated to, and these people have access to where we stored it. What we do to control access to this system, right? That's one of those controls you have to write. That's one of those processes that you've got to document. The different technologies that are involved in that simple, storing of a document, right? So I access that document via my corporate laptop. So the policies that my company has in place to identify me as a user, to identify my laptop as my laptop, to give me a role or some kind of permission over a particular file share on our network, how I get onto that network, all those kinds of things are involved in that process of me going to a file and being able to access that file, right? That laptop is part of the technology that I use to get there. The network that I'm using to get there, whether it be a Wi-Fi network, a wired network in a building, a VPN that I then connect into, all of those things become part of this, right? That file share, whether that be a cloud storage or a server I've got in a closet in my building, right? All of those things become part of that technology stack that I use to fulfill this process. The backup things where I back up that server, any monitoring tools, etc. All those things determine that, the people, the process, the technology that go into that. And then you want to be able to define the boundary around that system, right? Because if I'm a company and only, and 50% of my business is with the Department of Defense or the prime contractors that are fulfilling DoD contracts, and 50% of my business is commercial, it may be that I don't need everybody in my organization that's part of this process. So how I define those boundaries are going to help determine the extent of this system and the boundary that I'm going to draw upon that. So I just grabbed a kind of a system diagram just to give you an idea of what this thing might look like. Now, I grabbed this just from a web search about a NIST 800-171 diagram. And this is a cloud solution. So this is a company that is using kind of a typical setup up in AWS to provide storage for their information. So the questions that you ask yourself when you're putting this together is, again, that DMZ, if you will, that's labeled there, that's the boundary of the system. So how am I controlling that boundary? How do I have this network segmented so I'm sure that it's only mine and only that my individuals have access to it, right? Those users who are entering the system, they are given accounts somewhere. They're given permissions from something. So am I utilizing a web app? Am I utilizing an Active Directory, or am I, using something else to determine roles, permissions, and access to this particular segment? When I store that data, am I storing the data encrypted? Is the data encrypted both in transit and at rest? Am I using a proper kind of encryption technology? that meets the FIPS 142 standards, things like that. All of those things are what needs to be considered when you're talking about that system, that diagram, and that boundary. And then you have other systems that are actually monitoring, right, how this system is doing. You have system logs that tell you if there was any unauthorized access or unauthorized attempts at access. You have logs that just monitor uptime of the system to make sure it's up and running when needed. Those types of activities. Now, the one thing you see missing here that you often see when you're consuming cloud services are the actual individuals and the workstations or laptops or other devices that they're using to work within this system. And all of that kind of extends that boundary. So the more I can do to limit the numbers and types of users that need access to controlled unclassified information, the more I can narrow that boundary of where this information is stored, how it's handled, etc. All of those things will kind of ease the burden of my overall plan. Or, the other option is to say, look, I can't segment this out. My company works almost exclusively within the defense industrial base. So my whole system has to be able to meet this standard. So those are kind of the two approaches you'll do when you're defining this system itself. Now, this is just another example. This is actually one that we use here at Exostar for one of our solutions that provides a secure tenant for that storage of controlled unclassified information. In this, we use Azure GCC High, since that is a FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud service. Exostar wraps additional processes, procedures, etc. around that cloud service to ensure that this system itself meets those same requirements. So both the Exostar pieces, which also include kind of the people that manage this, right? So Exostar Tech Ops team, Exostar support team, etc. All of those people and systems are also part of the overall solution. And so then you're only responsible in this kind of setup for kind of the left-hand side where you see those users and partner users. The controls you put around those people, their access to the system, the methods you use to secure the machines you provide people, etc. That's again what's going to be enforced on if you will, the individual business or organization's responsibility of the overall system. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's what when you hear about a shared responsibility model for a cloud service, these are the things that you'll need to consider when you're thinking about that versus just a system you have in place yourself. So to start that journey, Exostar offers a number of different solutions to work your way through this roadmap, right? It really starts with Exostar with our certification assistant application. This is the application that Exostar offers out as a service that allows you to assess how you're doing against CMMC compliance at any level you've chosen to try to achieve. We then kind of work our way through, including that opportunity to have a third party come in and do an assessment. Now, this isn't that C3PA organization, right? That certified third party who comes in and does the official triennial assessment. These are typically organizations that come in and do what's called a readiness assessment. They'll look at your current policies, procedures, etc. They will often use the Exostar toolkit, if you will, to do those assessments, and they'll see how you're doing and give you that rating, give you your list. The output of these are typically that initial system security plan, any open POAMs you have, and then any remediation that's necessary to get those things closed off and move you further to that compliance goal. So the other thing to think about, as I talked a little bit about earlier, is to leverage those existing materials you probably have in place today, because again, this isn't the 800-171 requirement to have in place these controls for controlled unclassified information isn't new. These have been part of DFAR's contracts for a number of years. They've mandated this compliance, and and for a number of years now, they've required you to do that assessment, to generate a score, and to enter that score into the supplier performance risk system. So if you've done these things and you've generated that score, you probably have quite a bit of this documentation, or you've got somebody in your organization or a third party, a managed service provider, et cetera, that has done this work, at least in the past, to start you down this path. And so getting to kind of the CMMC level and getting that ready for that third party to do the assessment is really where you're going to, think about, spending your time, if you will, that consolidation of materials. So leverage these existing materials that you probably have in your organization today. Figure out how you generated that DAM score, it's DAMM, that actually goes into the SPRS system. Now, one way you may have done that, so Exostar has a tool called Partner Information Manager. A number of the large prime contractors out there use this system to gather a questionnaire around NIST 800-171 compliance. It asks you for your SPRS score and how you're doing against these, and it takes you through that 800-171 questionnaire, just as you'll see in a minute that we do within Certification Assistant itself, and asks you explicitly, have you implemented this? Are you still working on it, etc.? When is your open POAM on this control going to be closed? Things like that. So it walks you through that same kind of control. And if you've got that, that's another piece of that existing materials that you can leverage to kind of jumpstart your journey on this CMMC path. So as I talked about, this initial assessment, right? This is really, once you've kind of determined what level you're at, what the system is that you're going to actually be qualifying and the boundary around that system, and you've started to gather where that material might be, then I'd strongly suggest you consider using Exostar's Certification Assistant to help you go through that initial assessment. So Certification Assistant will walk you through each of those 110 controls. It'll allow you to say whether or not you've implemented them. It'll allow you to consolidate all the information you have around how you've implemented that control. So it's one thing to say, yes, my organization has an access policy for people that need to get access to controlled unclassified information. It's another thing to say, oh, we've got a written policy that tells us who the different types of users are that are accessing this system, the rights those different roles have when accessing those systems, how we determine if people need accounts, how they get approval to get those accounts, how we remove them from the system when they leave, how guest users and other types of users might be handled, all those kinds of things. So those are the policies that you need in place. So once you've got that policy written, or you documented it earlier, or it's in a file cabinet somewhere, right? Certification Assistant allows you to basically input that policy here. What you'll also typically have to do for the assessor is also show them the proof that you've actually implemented those policies. So, for like access control, there may be a list of active users and accounts that are associated with those users. And you would show the assessor, look, this is how we grant access. These are the roles they can have. Here's the list of people with that role. And then they'd want those, any proof, any logs, access logs and or monitoring logs that you may have around that system that shows that you've actually implemented that. Right. And then typically a process has to be running for a few months before they can assess whether or not it's actually, working as expected. So those kinds of things are what Certification Assistant allows you to do. So it allows you to get not only that first assessment, but as you work to fulfill your requirements and get those, and improve on how you're doing, Certification Assistant will allow you to track that. And the output of Certification Assistant, every time you update, change, enter information, etc., will be an updated system security plan, including an inventory of the software, hardware, individuals, etc., that are involved in that system. It'll be a DAM score that goes into that SPUR system. So as you need to input that score, you'll be able to get that from the system. And then it'll be, how you're doing against each of those controls, right? If you've fulfilled them all, you'll have 110 score and you'll have an SSP without any open POAMs. And a POAM is those, a program of actions and milestones because you have an open item. Right? If you haven't implemented a particular control, then you need to have a POAM in place to close that. Right? So if I don't have an access control, then I would have an open POAM to create an access policy, implement it, etc. And I'd have a certain amount of time that I need that I would have that I'm going to implement that by. And so all of those go into the program itself and how you want to keep track of and how you want to input and get information both from the system and have that information available when the assessor comes online. Right? So this is kind of what you would typically see around one of those POAMs, right? This is the practice. This is the action item I need to close it. Here is who it's assigned to. I need it, this is when we're starting it. This will be when it's due. And this allows us to go through this as, just kind of a project plan and how we're going to close those off. And all of this is done within Certification Assistant itself. If you don't want to do this manually via spreadsheets, binders, etc. Now, if some of those policies haven't been implemented, or you're not quite sure what a policy looks like, that other, Exostar has an application that will assist you with that as well. It's called Exostar Policy Pro for CMMC 2. This basically gives you help in writing your policies for those different controls. With each individual policy, it'll give you prompts on how to prepare that, how to gather information for that particular policy, who in your organization might know. It gives you a template, if you will, for that particular policy. Now, you can't just copy and paste that template. You've got to write it for your organization. The system will also then score that policy for you. It uses an AI algorithm that includes things like a word count, a thing around key elements. So it'll look for keywords within your policy to make sure you've addressed those key terms. It'll then give you a score on how you're doing for that particular policy. You can then take that policy, put it into Certification Assistant, and that'll be the baseline for how you're going to implement that policy. This will then allow you to track your closing of those particular POAMs. Now, if you want to utilize a cloud service if you'd like to utilize a cloud service to fulfill maybe a portion of your system. So for example, I want to engage with somebody for, in this case, it would be Exostar, because I want to have a secure place in the cloud to provide storage and a place to work on this controlled unclassified information. I don't want to keep it on site. I don't want to have to worry about standing up a server, gating off that network, etc. So I'm going to engage with Exostar. This is a solution Exostar offers today, right, called Managed Microsoft 365 for CMMC. That is a private enclave set up for Exostar customers, but it's managed by Exostar. It includes both the tech operation team that manages it, as well as the support team that you can call when you have issues. You then connect the people into that you want to have access to it. Exostar has written an application that controls that Microsoft Teams environment. So the teams that you create themselves meet the necessary controls. And then you grant users from your organization access to that tenant. It includes admin roles that allow you to create teams, invite additional users, invite third parties, etc., enforce two-factor authentication, ensures encryption of data at rest and in flight, etc. All those things that you need to fulfill those NIST 800-171. This kind of system, and this system in particular, satisfies 85 of those 110 controls of NIST 800-171, and therefore of CMMC level 2. Those other 25 controls are a shared responsibility, and that's really those connections outside the enclave to users, to machines, etc., that you want to have access to that controlled unclassified information. How those users connect, right, and the systems they use. So, Mary connects via laptop. She has access to that laptop because you've given her access to it as an organization. So your control over her access to the laptop, controls you put on the laptop itself, all those kinds of things become part of that shared responsibility. You having a yearly training session for Mary so she understands controlled unclassified information and how, when she wants to store it or work on it, it's in this enclave. That's part of your responsibility as the shared responsibility. The management of the enclave, all the controls of the people that monitor it, and all those kinds of things, that is on Exostar as part of this cloud solution provider. So once you've done this, you're then ready for assessment, right? You've closed your POAMs, you've consolidated all your material, you're now ready to go ahead and engage with that CMMC third-party assessment organization, and you're ready to go through that assessment process. So again, just a recap on that roadmap, right? You want to choose your level, you want to identify the system, you want to perform that initial assessment to identify those gaps. You want to use tools or partners to help you close out those gaps. You then want to consolidate those policies, put them in one place. So when you do engage with that assessment organization, you have that single place where you can work with them so they understand how you do things. You can easily explain to them how those things, and you can, if you will, lessen the burden of the assessment itself. So that completes kind of the formal part of the presentation today. Just want to remind everybody there is an exit poll. It's there in the YouTube description. We'd love it if you take some time to fill that out. That lets us know how we did today. It also lets us know your feedback, and you can give suggestions for additional topics you'd like to hear in the future. I'm now going to cover some Q&A questions. So I kind of broke these up into groups because a number of them were kind of around the same topic. So I think I covered quite a few of these during the presentation, but I just wanted to re-emphasize that because these were open questions. So we had quite a few around the timeline, right? I'm not quite sure on the first question I got what the 10/1/2024 date was. The May 2023 date is what I hear today. And the only other dates I hear about it is really that March of 2023. And that's when the interim rule will be published. So you've got the interim rule coming out in March of 2023. That then has a 60-day comment period. And then you've got the actual rule showing up in contracts in that May of 2023. Now, when you schedule your assessment, it's really going to be up to you, right? You're going to have the flexibility based on the contracts you want to fulfill and their requirements of when you actually get that first triannual assessment. Now, the DIBCAC audits that are part of the level 3, those could become, those could start any time after the interim rule is in place, or actually after the official rule is in place, not the interim rule. But when the finalized rule is in place, they could start any time after that. So we talked quite a bit about how do you determine that CMMC level, right? The easiest way is to really look at your current contracts. Determine what you do today. That'll be the best indicator of what you should do tomorrow. We also addressed that kind of what's the difference between NIST and CMMC. So CMMC is the official policy, or if you will, or the governing kind of policy that's going to put these controls in place. That's what CMMC is. It's going to be driven by those NIST standards. So the CMMC is what is going to be what mandates your compliance with NIST. NIST is the standards body. They're the ones who write the standard. So it's NIST 800-171-R2. So that's Rev 2 today. And they're currently working on Rev 3. So there will be some changes coming down the pipe. But those are going to be driven by NIST. And CMMC will just be the ones who decide when you're going to have to be able to change those. We had a couple of different things around Microsoft questions, right? So Microsoft itself, right, a number of their solutions are also FedRAMP moderate equivalent solutions or FedRAMP certified solutions. So they fulfill one of those, they're kind of like that cloud solution provider. So there are some Microsoft products and solutions that, because you utilize those, they'll fulfill some of those requirements. But there will be also some shared responsibility on you because of what you provision to your users to actually access, utilize, etc., those products. And that's really what you've got to understand there. As I mentioned, there is some certification programs that are just being announced today. I'd encourage you to go to that website, cyberab.org, to determine what level you want to get to and sign up for the right courses. They're not free of charge. There will be a charge, and there are some organizations that are already that will work through that accreditation body to get their program certified. So I've got another set of questions around Exostar specific, but before I jump into those, just wanted to let you know there's a whole lot of places to get information about this, right? I've got the website there for CyberAB. If you want some more information about CUI itself or how to figure out what is and what is not controlled unclassified information, there's a site there. If you're struggling to figure out how do you input that SPURS score that you generated, if you need a partner to help you with the assessment, or if you'd like to sign up for any of the Exostar free trials, right? These are available from our website. Both Policy Pro and Certification have 15-day free trials available. We'd love to have you sign up. And then, as I mentioned, we got some Exostar specific ones. So on the first one there, are there other Exostar offerings to help with compliance, and what are their costs? So I got a couple other questions about costs. So, Exostar's Microsoft managed for CMMC is $50 per user per month. It's a 20 user minimum. So for a year subscription, it would be $12,000 for 20 users. Exostar's Policy Pro is $14.99. As I mentioned, there's a free 15-day trial from our website if you'd like to go there. And kind of that question about what's the difference between managed Microsoft for CMMC and Microsoft 365 and the license type. So managed Microsoft for CMMC is an Exostar managed tenant. Exostar manages it for you. The only thing you have to worry about is giving users access to it. Getting a Microsoft license for Microsoft 365 as an E5 license type, you then manage everything, right? So you manage the users, you manage the OneDrive, all those component pieces of it for both, kind of your regular corporate stuff, as well as any controlled unclassified information you get over that. And then you figure out how you're going to classify it, fence it off, etc. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at that CMMC-team at exostar.com. So as I wrap up, I want to thank everybody for your time today. Just remind everybody to please fill out that exit poll. Love to have your comments and feedback. Thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.